the concluding episode of the Journey in Recovery series for December of 2022. Really excited to wrap this up and to get back to doing live meetings next week, next Friday, January 6th of 2023, when we will hear from Robert P., and his topic will be Alone versus Lonely in Recovery, and he's really excited and energetic about kicking off 2023 with a bang. All right, so let's get down to this next bit of this meeting. So my name's Justin. I am the host of RICO 12, and I hosted the Journey Through Life podcast back in 2017, 18, 19, and early 2020, where it was a long-form conversation podcast with really ordinary people. My higher power at the end of 2019 said, Justin, I need you to learn more about recovery. And he had me talk to a whole lot of people from a whole lot of different backgrounds and addictions and fellowships, and I just learned a ton. And this is the final episode, and it's about Step 12, where Phil L. will be talking a little bit about his experience, strength, and hope in Step 12 and in working his recovery, giving back. Phil is one of the better, maybe the best examples of working Step 12 that I have ever met. And I remember after having this conversation feeling that it was like super powerful and something that would be really important to share with young men and young women if I am a parent of these young, teenage children and feel it appropriate to do so. There's a story here that starts at the age of 12 that is really relatable to many issues of today. So anyways, in this episode, we'll be talking with Phil L. about Step 12. And as I mentioned, Phil's story starts at 12 years old with exposure to internet pornography and quickly spins out of control to suicidal thoughts and plans, and we'll follow his journey in desperate search for healing and a return to the feelings he had before he was exposed to pornography. All right, so a little bit of business here. Please share and talk about RICO 12 with your recovery networks. Share with them episodes that mean a lot to you. Jump in on the WhatsApp group, and you do that by emailing rico12pod@gmail.com, RECO12pod@gmail.com, and I'll get you in that group. If you're already in that group and want to invite anybody in, reach out to me in the group, directly to me as an administrator, and I can add them. And then let's see, if you want to donate through the links that are in the show notes of this meeting and any other meeting with RICO 12. And I think that is about it. Let's get rolling on this last episode. I look forward to seeing you all live next week on Zoom and getting back to asking questions and answering questions and hearing from a more interactive situation. But it's been such a good close to the year. I'm really grateful to be able to share these episodes with the RICO 12 audience, as they have not been exposed to these stories before. Anyways, here we go. So through the magic of the internet, I'm sitting here with Phil, and I'm grateful to have him sit down with me. Phil, why don't you introduce yourself as if you were in a 12-step meeting?
Yeah, I would love to. My name is Phil. I'm a sexaholic. My sobriety date is 7/10 of 2015. I have many weaknesses, character weaknesses. I am a son of God, somebody who has hopes and dreams.
Awesome. Thanks, Phil, for being willing to sit down with me. So you mentioned that you're a sexaholic. Tell me a little bit about what that means to you and what your experience is in discovering that it was an addiction in your life.
Yeah, so let's see. When I was 12, I got introduced to pornography via the internet. I wasn't curious about sex or anything like that until an image popped up on the screen, and it was over at that point. I remember being just completely enthralled in the image, and at that point, I could not get my mind away from that. And so then started on this snowball going down a hill, and continually having to find more and more images, more and more videos, more and more things. And really it started to take over my entire life. It started to be something that I would choose to do instead of things like eating, doing it instead of things like interacting with friends, instead of things like interacting with my family. It started to take precedence over many of my decisions, and it got to the point where when I was 12 or 13, when I was a year into my recovery, I could not control anything. And so at that point, I laid out a suicide plan.
Wow.
And I knew that I could not go on with life because I no longer had choice. At that point, I ended up having this thought that went into my head, and it was, if God's real, that's not a very smart choice. I don't know why. I don't understand why that was the thought that came into my head, but that's the thought that came into my head. So I said, okay, I'll give it a shot. And so I actually went out back. There's this orchard back behind my house, and I knelt down and just prayed to a higher power, to a God, because I didn't know. I didn't really believe in a God that would allow this stuff to be thrown at a 12-year-old boy. And so I had a really amazing experience where I don't doubt that God is present, that God is real. Obviously, I'm still here today. And so that led me on a journey that up until 4.5 years ago led me to try and figure out how on earth do I find choice again, because I had lost choice. I had lost my ability to make a decision of what I wanted, and how do I regain that again into my life?
Wow. So going back a little bit, you were introduced to pornography at 12 years old. And in that first year, you had already spun out of control to the point where you were like, something's got to die here. It's either myself or the old way of living. And you had made that plan of carrying out suicide at 12, 13 years old, huh?
Yes,
that's pretty painful.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not something that even now, like I still have, if I think back on that time, it's really hard to remember that time because, I had hopes and dreams. I wanted to play, high school soccer. I wanted to be the best at what I was doing. And what would always happen is, as soon as I'd get out of a structured environment like school and I'd get home, then the only thing that my mind could think about was, how could I get, for lack of better terms, get my next fix? Yeah. How could I get my next moment to relieve this pain that I feel because I can't make a choice?
Yeah, I really appreciate, Phil, the way that you are describing this journey into addiction and how it so quickly, especially in regards to sex addiction, how it so quickly for you just spiraled into, and you recognized that it spiraled into something that was out of control. Now, whether you were able to control it for a long time or not, that's a different story, right? And even now, would you say you control this?
No, this is not something that I control. This is something that I let go of.
Yeah. What I think what a lot of people, and I've said this before in my life, and I've heard lots of other people say this, and I think I've said this in one or two of these interviews that I've done on these steps, is, what do you say to somebody who says, dude, you're a teenage boy, all teenage boys are just like that? What do you say to somebody who says something like that?
Yeah, that's a really hard question and a really good one to ask, because the only thing that I can give, the thing that I've learned, and this is where, when we get to talk about step 12, we'll talk about, you can only share what you've got. And all I've got is my example and my story. So for me, when I really evaluated myself, I've always been somebody who evaluates where I'm at, what I'm feeling. I've been that way even before 12 years old. And what I found was that when I wanted to do something, so there was a part of me that really wanted to get outside in the backyard and juggle the ball and get good at that. I wanted to learn how to skateboard. I wanted to spend more time with my friends. But what happened was, I could not make that choice because I would then spend the next few hours stuck in a room with a computer, hoping that my parents wouldn't walk in. Then felt a lot of shame and guilt and frustration because it did not feel right to me. And whenever I was done viewing, I never felt satisfied. So in my mind, I wanted peace, I wanted happiness, I wanted confidence, I wanted love. But in my mind, all I was feeling at that time was frustration, fear, annoyance, struggle, and that I wasn't worth anything. Now, yes, I understand that many kids go through those feelings. Mine were tied specifically to my viewing of pornography and masturbation.
So, and another thing that I hear, and I don't think I hear this quite as much, at least vocally, quite as much as I used to, or I believe it's still very entrenched in the culture, is there's nothing wrong with pornography. It's an art form. It's a consensual thing that people get into. What's your take on that about pornography specifically?
Yeah, in doing research and in my progression through getting to the point where I finally let go of this addiction, I came across information that really it's not consensual. It's acting. And that majority of those women, majority of those men, they're on drugs, they're on antidepressants, they're not happy. And that really hit me because if they're not happy while that's doing it, and I'm not happy while I'm doing this, then how can this be something good? And so I mean, my personal belief and what I've learned and what I've read, there's very little that people are actually happy and loving it. And, I don't know about you, but anytime I have to be in hiding for doing something and I'm not really proud of what I'm doing, and not everybody does that, but that to me isn't very happy. That to me is really frustrating. And I like to be out with people.
Yeah. So obviously you came to the point at 12 or 13 years old that you realized I've got a real problem here. I can't do anything about it. What do I do about it? And you talked a little bit about your journey as to trying to find what to do about it. When did you first get introduced to recovery in whatever form that was when you first were introduced to recovery?
When I was 19, I realized in order to go do a mission for my church, I needed to abstain from pornography and masturbation, and so I did. And while I was there, I focused like solely on God, and focused on Jesus, and focused on sharing a good message. And that was my entire time was spent doing that. And the desire and the pain started to go away at that point. So at that point, I knew or learned that I needed a higher power. I needed somebody greater than myself to have any impact on this, because the 7 years prior to that, I had tried on my own and I had never been able to be successful at getting this out of my life. And so that was the very first time that I had any sort of success. And, I abstained from pornography and masturbation for a little over 2 years at that point.
And then obviously something changed when you got back from that mission. Tell me a little bit about what happened to take you back to places that you had left behind during your mission.
Yeah. So when I was finishing up my mission, I had this thought. And again, I've always been somebody who is reflective. And so I evaluate myself, and I tried to be as honest as I could with myself at that point, and with the knowledge that I had. And what I thought was, if I go home and I no longer have the structure and the focus on God, and now it's going to be more on myself, and I'm going to be out on my own, and I don't have this environment, I'm going to go back to it. That was the thought I had. And so I messaged my parents and I said, I need some help. So at that point, I actually went to a psychiatrist, and I went to a psychologist, and I went to the LDS Church's addiction recovery program.
Okay.
From there, when I went to the addiction recovery program for the first time, I thought it was a joke. And just being honest with the situation, what I saw was a bunch of guys who had hope in what I had hope in, but nobody had, and we'll talk about this later, nobody had the light. Nobody had the peace and the comfort and the freedom that I was searching for. Yeah, nobody had that. And so for me, I was like, well, if nobody has that, then why am I going to go to this one?
Right.
And so then I went on a journey. I wanted this out of my life, and I fought so hard to search and find so many places. And so I did multiple internet programs trying to find and learn as much as I could about addiction and sexual addiction, and until I had a moment. And I had what I call as a spiritual awakening. And so I actually remember I was sitting in Vegas of all places, right? I mean, that's like last addict's dream. And I was sitting there. I was reading, sitting in a rowboat, throwing marbles at a battleship. I don't know if you've ever read that, but I had just finished reading the equation of A affects B, B affects C, and the only thing that I can describe it as is I felt like I had a vision, and what I saw was two roads in front of me that were going in opposite directions. And I had this feeling that if I chose to go to one side, that I was going to lose my family. I was going to lose my job. I was going to lose everything. Because if I took one more step forward in that direction, I wasn't coming back, because I had no more fight left in me. Because I had been fighting and fighting and fighting for so long to try and get rid of this addiction. And so finally in that moment, I said, I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I don't care if it means that I've got to stop going to church. I don't care if it means that I've got to stop. I didn't care. Mm-hmm. I was willing to do whatever it took. And the absolute one thing I was not willing to do was to go to an SA meeting. Because in my culture where I grew up, that was like, then you finally made it. Like, you are the scum of the earth, you're the bottom of the barrel. And that's what I thought. And finally I had enough pain, and I had this, I believe it was a vision that then showed me that if I take another step in this way, I'm not going. So I have to go this route. And so I did. I went there, and then I found immediately was told about another program that had a lot of structure, a lot of, I was able to get a sponsor. And at that point is when I actually started working the steps for the first time. And it's been almost 5 years since that day.
So you went into an SA meeting, the thing that you definitely did not want to do, because you thought you'd go and see guys in trench coats that were just whatever it was in your mind that you envisioned this being. So when you went in, what were your emotions as you're approaching the door or whatever to that SA meeting for the first time? And then what did you learn about yourself and about that program in that first handful of meetings?
Oh, you're bringing out emotions. I have never been that scared, and remember when I was 12, like, I was ready to lose my life. And so I had felt scared, but this was a whole nother level in some ways, because it meant that I was about to go in front of, in my mind, quote unquote, the scum, the worst people that I had been taught to believe, and not from my parents, but just that was the aura around it, that I was about to become that. And that was terrifying. And I felt like I was possibly going to get judged, and nobody would understand my story. And I remember going into that meeting, and for the first time since I was 12. I mean, mind you, I was 26, I think, at this time.
Okay.
So what is that? That's 14 years.
Yeah.
14 years, and I had never felt understood. And I walked in, and these guys gave me a handshake. They looked at me and they said, "We know, and we love you, and we care." And not that other people hadn't cared about me to that point, but what it was that they could see me as a whole. They didn't get to see just a portion of me that I was willing to show. I was able to show the parts of me that were the dirtiest and darkest parts of my entire life, and they loved me. And they loved me enough to allow me a platform to share and not say anything other than, "We get it. We understand."
And was that from the first meeting you went to, that you felt that acceptance and that love and that comfort there, or did it take a couple for you?
For me, it was the first time.
Awesome.
Mind you, though, I had been prepared and had already gone through a bunch of different meetings before. And so, like, I'd been to addiction recovery program meetings and other things. And so it wasn't the first shock. Now, if you go back to when I went to the addiction recovery program meeting, then no, I didn't feel that same thing, even though I'm sure that was what they were trying. I wasn't really willing to share. But this is the first time that I went to a meeting and I was willing to open up and share about every aspect of my life, and that I didn't care. And so that's when I felt it. It wasn't until I was willing to open up. But when I opened up, I felt it.
Yeah. So possibly even in those first meetings you went to, the addiction recovery program meetings, possibly the struggle with that was your own closed, just holding on to things and not willing to open up at all, huh?
Yeah, I would. I mean, that's a great way to explain it, because it wasn't anything wrong with the program. The program actually does an extremely good job of sharing the message of the Savior. But I just was not ready to allow myself to be seen.
Yeah.
At that point.
Thank you for sharing that that series of experiences. I think that will be, well, it's helpful to me, but I think it'll be very helpful to a lot of other people who hear this too, to not normalize, but understand that they're not alone. There's a lot of people that walk that same path that you're walking there, and there's resources for them. So you talked about getting a sponsor. Tell me about how that looked as you worked your steps. How did your sponsor take you through the steps?
Yeah, so my sponsor was sponsoring through a particular program that had already a bunch of structure. Within that structure, he held me accountable to certain rules, certain things. He held me accountable to writing in a journal. So I wrote in a journal morning and evening, and I sent it to him morning and evening. I did a morning step work. Now, that step work was typically reading a particular part of a document that had a topic on step 0, step 1, step 2, depending on where I was. And then it asked for me to share my thoughts. And a lot of times it was the same question, just asked in a different way.
Right.
And so I got to answer that multiple times. I got to answer that in many different ways, and it helped me see it from different sides. And so I went through the whole program that way. And when I got to step 4, which step 4 is, we make a fearless moral inventory, one where I actually open up and I have written down every single piece about my life, and it's written down on a piece of paper, which I'll tell you, that is one of the most terrifying things in the world, but it's one of the most freeing. And I put that all into a spreadsheet. And, the thing that is amazing that I want to point out here is that my sponsor never once looked at me and said, "You did that?"
Hmm.
Never once did he judge and say, I can't believe how bad of a person you are. Not once did he ever be surprised by anything that I put down. And in fact, it was almost always, I get it.
Hmm.
I was there. You know, one of my favorite stories, and I'm going to butcher this so I don't know the exact words of it. One of my favorite stories shows really what a sponsor is supposed to be. And it talks about how, you know, a guy falls into a pit, and a politician walks by, and, you know, he looks at the guy in the pit who's yelling for help, and he says, you know what? I care about you. I'm going to write a law that says you can get out of here, and then walks away.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it goes through a bunch of different people until it gets to another addict, a recovering addict,
mm-hmm.
who hears the guy that's sitting in the pit, and he goes and he jumps in the pit with him. And the guy's like, "You're stupid. Like, why on earth did you jump in here?"
Mm-hmm.
And the recovering addict says, "Don't worry. I've been here before. I know the way out." And then he proceeds to lead the guy who got stuck in the pit out. And that is what my sponsor did. My sponsor helped guide me. And as long as I was willing to do whatever it took, as long as I was willing to stay sober and send morning and evening journal entries and do my morning step work first thing in the morning, then I received sobriety. And really began to learn what a life in recovery was like.
Yeah. And that's a great example of step 12 that we're going to be talking about here, you know. And what step 12 reads from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and you know, we'll adapt it here to what we're talking about. But it reads, having had a spiritual awakening, which is something you referred to earlier, kind of in that vision you talked about. So having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics, or in this case, sexaholics, and to practice these principles in all our affairs. So Phil, tell me a little bit about what that step means to you and why that step is an important step in your own life.
Yeah. You know, as I've been preparing for this conversation and really diving back into step 12 and making sure that I understood it, at least with my experience, what this looks like to me and how it's applied in my life is that, number one, I can't give what I don't have. So if I haven't had that spiritual awakening, I cannot share it with somebody, and I can't help them receive their own spiritual awakening. And second thing is that I need to be carrying this to as many people as possible. Saying I'm a sexaholic to my neighbor down the street isn't really something that's a good thing to do.
Right.
But they see a change and they see the light, and sharing with them, you know, the light that I have, that I've been able to be given. You know, this light was not something that I made. I tried making that light. It's impossible. But this light is made, or not made, and this light is given. And it's given by my higher power as a result of these steps, as it says. You know, hopefully I answered your question. That's what it's been for me.
And how you say the light has been given you. How has, well, for example, you're married. You mentioned your family earlier. You're married, correct?
Yes, I am.
How has that light and that spiritual awakening affected your marriage? How has your wife's perception of you changed? Maybe not perception, but experience with you changed?
I would say it's both perception and experience. Specifically talking about my wife, you know, I talked to her yesterday. You know, I think in any relationship you're going to have arguments, and more so when I say argument, I mean you're trying to figure out how to mesh two histories to become a new one. And when you have two histories that come together and a certain experience comes up that one person would react this way and the other person would react another way, you're going to have somewhat of a fireworks show. Doesn't mean that the fireworks are like I'm throwing things across the room, but it means that you're going to have a disagreement. And in the past, early on, especially in my marriage, my response was to immediately become the victim. My response was to then find something wrong about my wife and what she was saying. My response was to start manipulating immediately. Now, is that really what I meant to do? Is that really what my intentions were? Is that really what, like in my mind, I was like, oh, I'm going to manipulate my wife? No. That's the whole thing about this sickness. That's the whole thing about this addiction is you have no idea what you're doing. But as I look back, that's exactly what was happening. And so I did that to my spouse. And as I received, I mean, it's almost like, to me, I can see it almost to the day, till, that time, I can see the change that started to happen. When these moments would happen, immediately I would go to that victim. But you know what? The time frame that it took for me to then all of a sudden to recognize that I was being selfish or I was in the wrong, or that I was, if I had reacted this way, her response would not have been this. And I started to wake up. Again, it's an awakening. I started to wake up to see that in my belief that every reaction that my wife has is a direct result of how I responded just before that, or how my choice made her go into a particular place that maybe I didn't know about. And here's a perfect example. So yesterday, it was yesterday, right? 4.5 years into sobriety. Yesterday, I'm sitting there and, I'm off for work. It's Sunday, we're home as a family. And I'm sitting there at the table and I have a thought in my head. And the thought is, I need to go upstairs and figure something out on the computer. Like, it was something that needed to get done. So I turn around and I walk upstairs. And I'm focusing on getting done what I need to. And I get a text from my wife, and it's, are you working on a report? Because I write reports, and I go, no. Do you need any help? Because she was making dinner, and she came up after that, and she said, essentially, she was trying to help show me a social thing that is socially acceptable, and that I should have done was saying, hey, babe, I'm going upstairs to work on this, and I'll be down in about 10-15 minutes. But because my choice was to just turn around and walk upstairs, I got this reaction. You know what I immediately did? I turned into the victim. And so we start getting to this little back and forth where really we're starting to get a little heated. And finally it hits me again. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that was my fault. I did that. I set this up. I start, all of a sudden I start seeing where my wrong is. And where my wife was completely in the right. And so then I immediately start applying step 10, which is recognize my wrong and make amends and turning to God. And the interaction changed. But that is the awakening. The awakening isn't that all of a sudden I'm going to have all these grand experiences with my wife, and I'm going to, my wife and I, because I'm sober, my wife and I are going to be super happy together every second of the day. That's bullcrap.
Yeah.
Because that's not reality. And as an addict, I tried to stay out of reality as much as I could. And now the awakening is awakening me to reality, and that I need to really I need to always be assessing where my fault is, because it's rarely my wife's fault. So that's an example. So my wife can see that. We had that conversation after, because I was like, do you see that I'm changing? And she goes, yeah, like we're having less arguments and we don't have to have these big, long conversations all the time about how I was so rude and I hurt her, and because I'm awakening.
Those are some good examples. I like that. Tell me how you work your step 12? I mean, we've talked a little bit about it, but tell me how you work it on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I got lost from really applying my step 12 as much as I used to. And this conversation has really brought me back to really focusing on that. So I really appreciated that. But a big chunk of working my step 12 is that I always ask myself questions at the end of the day. And those questions, start with really what step 10 is. Step 10, have I offended anybody today?
Mm-hmm.
And if so, I need to make amends. And then I go into my step 11, and I've really been working on, am I connecting with God or am I just talking at him? But step 12 is, am I grateful? Am I seeing? Am I really identifying that my life has changed? Or am I getting back into a rut of this is just habit and this is just who I am? Or am I sitting here going, you know what? I am so grateful that God gave me this freedom from my addiction. And so when I work, what it looks like for me to work it is that I'll usually say a prayer of gratitude and recognizing that. Then one of the things that I'll always try to do is I am always open to sharing a principle of recovery to anybody that I meet. My coworkers, a lot of them know that I am an addict. Now, they don't know what kind.
Right.
But they know that I have addictive tendencies. And that has led to them opening up about their own addictions, which has then led to me creating some of the truest friends that I've ever been able to gain.
Right.
And we then share our successes and really share the principles of recovery. I'll give an example.
Okay.
Without giving too much information about myself, but I play a sport and I play it competitively.
Mm-hmm.
I was at a particular competition, and I was talking with an individual that I had met a few times before and had competed against, and we were discussing and talking, and I just kept getting this feeling in the back of my mind of share. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, no, like, what? I don't want to share this like out in the public. This is open. This is like I don't want to share because there's anybody that could walk past and hear me talking about my addiction. And I just kept getting that prompting. And so finally I was like, fine, like this. And that fine, that's step 12 of fine. And I opened up and I shared with him my experience. And I shared with him just enough of what I felt like I was being prompted to share. And he opened up. And to this day, he's one of my dearest friends. So I believe that working step 12 and actually working step 12 goes deeper than just, I'm just grateful and I'm sharing with every addict. I believe that step 12 is sharing the principles of freedom from any type of thing that I have that's taking control of my life. And learning those things and then sharing that I am vulnerable and that I struggle. And as I struggle and as I really work hard at trying to meet the needs of these barriers that are preventing me from connecting to my higher power, connecting to other people, as I work on those and I share that story, there is somebody else that will take it and they will finally find the key for their own happiness. To me, that is step 12. That is working step 12. It becomes a way of life. It becomes a way that I can't function unless I am sharing that. Because if I don't do that, God will take it away from me.
Okay, so expound on that a little bit. If I don't do that, God will take it away from me. Tell me why you believe that, and tell me if you have any experience either in your own life with that or maybe observing somebody firsthand where that has happened.
Yes. So in the 12 steps, we recognize that we of ourselves are powerless. That's very step 1. And what I experienced with that was despair. and that there was no way that I could get out of my life until I recognized, which is step 2, the hope that there is a way, but that way is through a higher power. So essentially, the only way that I can have 24 hours, a minute, a second of sobriety, that I'm not hanging on to something, that I'm not white knuckling it, is if God is granting me his grace and is making it possible for me to have sobriety. And so I would say, with your question regarding, a moment where that was taken away, that ebbs and flows throughout my day. That ebbs and flows throughout my weeks. And sometimes I go months where that's taken away because I am trying to take back the control. I used to think one of the stupidest songs in the entire world was Jesus Take the Wheel. Because I always thought and grew up that it was by my power, and that if I just buckled down and I work hard and put as much effort into it that I can, that I would be able to be successful. And that is not the case in addiction. The more you do that, the more you stay. So you have to do the opposite and let go completely, which feels so opposite of what you should be doing. Mm-hmm. And so it's a daily practice. And so for me, there's been many moments throughout my life, where I am not letting go. And I feel frustration. I feel fear. I teach people all the time about the fruits of recovery, because they're an easy way for you to identify whether or not you're in sobriety or in recovery, or whether you're white knuckling. Because if I'm in sobriety, I feel peace, I feel love, I feel hope, I feel comfort. But if I'm white knuckling, I'm starting to feel fear. I'm starting to feel frustration. I'm starting to feel anxiety. And not just the regular everyday anxiety, but it's the anxiety about my recovery. And so I feel like I fall out of that, and God takes that away. So he takes away the peace, because he's the one that gives it. Is that he takes that away, and then I feel all this anxiety and stuff, all the fruits of white knuckling. And not until I'm willing to, in a way, grovel back and say, okay, whatever is the next thing that you want me to do, what is the next thing? Then he goes, finally, here you go. And he gives it back.
I've been waiting for you, huh?
Exactly. Because I do believe that God is waiting for each of us who are addicts, that he is waiting to give it to us. The problem is that we stand in the way. It's never him. It's always me.
I like how you're sharing these things. Good self-reflection. It's good advice for others listening. One of the things I've learned in doing this process of speaking with, recovering addicts on each of the 12 steps over the last few months has been a lesson that I learned for myself from talking with these other people. I've had people say, I live in step 2. I live in step 7, or I live in step 11. That is where I live in my own recovery. And I came to learn probably about the 5th or 6th week of doing this, that I live in step 12. That's where my heart is. And where almost everything that I see in recovery, when I'm reading, whether it's scripture or when I'm listening to inspired people share their experiences, I hear step 12 in all of those things and apply it to my own life. And for me, one of the most powerful experiences or powerful examples of step 12 comes from the New Testament. So this is after Jesus has been crucified and resurrected, and he comes back and he sees his disciples, Peter, they're out there fishing and they haven't caught anything all night. and then he says, hey guys, go catch some fish, throw your net on the other side, catch some fish. And they come in and realize it's Jesus, and they're sitting there eating fish. And Jesus says, Peter, do you love me? Well, yeah, I love you. No, do you love me? Well, yeah. Well, feed my sheep.
and does this 3 times. And Peter, who was the first disciple, the one that jumped out of his ship when Jesus very first said, "Hey, come follow me," and was with him all the time and just enthusiastic and zealous about everything. And yet he kept falling on his face, the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Then Jesus says to Peter, "When thou art converted, strengthen thy brethren." And if I'm Peter right there, my natural man instinct is to be like, "Are you kidding me? When I'm converted, have I not been the first one in line every single time? Have I not been following you?" But Jesus says, "No, when you're converted, strengthen your brothers." And that is kind of where his heart turned, and he became this great disciple who lived the gospel, who healed people just as Jesus had done, who did these, the leader of the church after Christ's ascension. And he became converted. And that's to me, that's the principle of step 12. When I'm converted, when I have that spiritual awakening, I need to strengthen others. Because if I do, I have this knowledge, and you talked about this, and this is what brought it to my mind. If I have this knowledge and don't do anything about it, it doesn't do me or anybody else any good, and it will be taken from me. And to me, that is step 12 in just a handful. Do you have any particular, passages of scripture or quotes or anything like that really just ring out to you in recovery?
Oh, yeah. Some of the most important scriptures, I believe in a book called the Book of Mormon. There's one in there that's called Mosiah. It's Mosiah 3:19. And in that passage of scripture, it talks about the natural man being an enemy to God and will be unless he becomes like a child and yields. And that's one that, for me, helped me distinguish a couple things. Number one is that my natural man is the one that's in charge, and that's the one that's got to say, okay. Because my spirit is always willing. So my natural man's the one that's got to say, yes, you can, I'll live a life too without my addiction. And so that's been a huge one. Another one is Ether 12:27. And that one is essentially talking about two things. One is weak things will become strong, but even more so that if I go to God, he's going to show me my weaknesses. And I hate that. But that being said, when I go to God, and if I truly go to him, he will show me who I've offended, who I have essentially ruined their day or possibly altered the way that they think because of my manipulation or whatever it is. And he'll show that to me. So I've loved that scripture. And then I believe it's Philippians 4:13, where it's, I can do all things through Christ who strengtheneth me. Because all of those scriptures helped give me hope, but then also guided me in my journey to where I am today. And so I use those three. Those are probably the three main ones. I have many others, but those are the three off the top of my head that really come out.
Awesome. Those are really great examples. I love them. Before I go to a couple of wrap-up questions, is there anything else in specific to step 12 or your own story that you feel is important to share at this point?
Yeah. I was talking about it with one of my friends in recovery just today. And it really, it's that for me, recovery is a process. I think so often we're looking at becoming or getting somewhere. It's a destination. And the more that I learn about recovery, it's not that. It's becoming somebody different. And that is always, for lack of better terms, line upon line, precept upon precept. It comes and we change a little bit at a time. And so I will never really see the change until months down the road. But if I give up on it early, I will never see the change. And so when I talk to people and they're frustrated that they acted out, they're frustrated that they, quote unquote, failed.
Mm-hmm.
I always talk about really that, yes, you made a decision and a choice, but recovery is never failure. Acting out is never failure. What it really is it's an opportunity for you to progress and to change and to become something different, because I would not have gotten to where I was 4.5 years ago if I hadn't have had when I was 12 and I was ready to, and I was ready to end my life. If I hadn't have struggled through 13 to 18, and if I hadn't have had the 2 years of sobriety on my mission, and then gone home and gone back to it and then struggled with it in a marriage and gone through that. If I hadn't have done all that, I would not have gotten to the point where I finally was willing to let go. And so I'm a huge, huge advocate for progression, and that recovery will come when it's time. And so sometimes we try to force recovery, and we don't allow life to really play its part. And we need to allow life to play, because God will use life to make it so that we can progress and become something different. So I'm a huge, huge advocate for progression, and that, it's never a failure. If you're resetting your sobriety date, that's great. Sobriety dates mean very little, other than that's how big of a miracle you received.
Yeah.
That's all it is. And so it's about really trying to progress. So that's a huge part. And then the other part is that, if you're listening to this message and you're listening to this podcast, hopefully what you found is that you're not alone. You really aren't. That there are many, many people. The more that I am open, the more that I am letting myself out and becoming a part of this, of recovery, and letting it be a part of me, and that my decisions are based on my experience and recovery, the more that I find that every single person that I interact with has the same issues. It's just going to be something different. And so we are not alone. That is the biggest lie. Yes. Am I alone? Is my addiction maybe different than my neighbor's? Heck yeah. But I believe that we all do in one way or another, and we're all compensating for struggling with the crap that's life. And very few of us are actually looking to the Savior and God and actually accessing the peace. And we're turning to ice cream at night, turning to brownies, turning to video games, turning to TV shows, turning to all those things. And I still do those things. And it's because I am not willing to really let go enough yet. We're all there. So those are the things that I really, if you with your question, like, if this was not about step 12 and you wanted to talk about recovery, that's what I preach. That's what I talk about, because in my life, that is what my experience has been.
And I think that leads into one of the two wrap-up questions I have really well. In fact, I think you defined one of the words that I want to ask very well. But I'd like to ask you to define in your own experience the words abstinence, sobriety, recovery, and healing.
Ooh. All right, we'll start with abstinence. Abstinence, I believe, is just refraining. So I'm distancing myself from something. So if I'm being abstinent from sex, I'm not having sex. It's the action. Sobriety, I would use that, or the way I would describe sobriety is that I am starting to work towards working on the issues that make it so that I want more of whatever it is. So if I'm sober from sugar, it's not that I'm just refraining from sugar. It's that I'm actively working on the things that are driving me to go towards sugar. Okay. And sobriety is a length of time. Now, recovery is that I have let go. It's the act of I'm in the process. I'm still working on things, but I've let go and said, you know what, God, whatever it is that you asked me to do, I'm willing to do that, including, heaven forbid, having to let go of sugar. Right? but I'm willing to let it go. And so I'm in recovery because I am in that active moment of trying to let go. I believe healing is the result that comes and that's given when we're in active recovery. But healing is a process, and healing takes time. And you know what? I cannot tell you how many times in my life where I've had the struggle of I want to be healed from this right now and not being healed. But you know what? 6 months down the road, and after having addressed it and given it to God and said, you know what, whatever it is that you want me to do, I'll do. Then through little things that he's placed in my path, that he's given me, put me in situations, it changed me. And in that process, healed me. And so I believe that all of those are again, I look at life as progression, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that being abstinent is a great thing to practice. I think that it's a start. Learning sobriety or being in sobriety, that's where you really start immersing yourself in the steps. When you finally come to that moment where for me, it was a vision, but you come up with that awakening and you're willing to let go and actually work every part of recovery, you are now in recovery. And then through time, you gain blessings. So hopefully that makes sense.
No, thank you. Thank you for sharing that experience. And one last wrap-up question, and it's more of an invitation. I'm asking you to speak directly to the listener and invite them to hopefully take a step towards the experiences that you've experienced in your recovery journey.
Yeah, for anybody who's listening, really it's more of a plea. Because living in the life that was my addiction was pure hell. And learning to let go and work and open up myself to these people that are in these 12-step meetings finally allowed me to gain freedom. And so I guess my invitation is to go. My invitation is to be open to the possibility that you are worth it. Be open to the possibility that you can have freedom. Because even if you've spent 40 years trying to figure this out, I know people right now who are actively working the steps that have been trying for 40 years and are finally finding that success and happiness. Don't ever give up. Don't ever back off. Don't ever let that darkness that's there, don't ever let that take hold forever. Try your darndest to let go and allow the process to work, because it will. That's been my experience. So that's my invitation.
Awesome. Well, Phil, this has been a really meaningful conversation for me. I hope it's been meaningful for you.
It's been very therapeutic. I loved it.
So there's Phil and his experience, strength, and hope. Thank you so much again, Phil. Grateful for your participation in this. And you also spoke in the RICO 12 meeting. I believe it was number 20. I'm grateful to have you do that and share your experience, strength, and hope with us, the RICO 12 audience, and then the Journey Through Life audience. All right, let's close out this meeting with a reminder. Join in the Facebook group. Follow us on Instagram. Join in the WhatsApp group. Join in and follow us around and work your step 12 and ask questions that may come up. Answer others' questions that may be posted. Let's share our experience, strength, and hope together and work that step 12. All right, remember, we're getting back to live next Friday, January 6th, noon Central Time. Robert P. will be speaking with us. Look forward to having a good audience in there and getting some really good experience, strength, and hope from Robert P., who is super energetic and excited. He's spoken a couple of times previously, including he was the one who launched 2022 for us. He was our first speaker in 2022. It's become a little bit of a tradition, I guess, to have him kick off our new year. So he's a fantastic speaker, a fantastic guy. All right, remember, there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. Keep coming back. Let's trudge this road of happy destiny together.
you.